Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Kyle Tolsman, and you're listening to the Against All Average podcast, episode 13, the show where business owners and entrepreneurs come to learn the skills and mindset to lead exceptional lives. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Jake, the Slick City Sailor from St. Helens, Spurley.
Wow.
What's up, Jake?
Wow, I'm really digging the intro there, Kyle. I feel so honored to be your co-host, dude.
Is that all you got? Is that all you got? Are you awake today? Let's
I'm
go.
awake today, dude. Let's go. Hey, on a different note, I had a question for you, real quick.
One question or two?
Just one. I see those whiteboards in the background there, and I just have to ask, do you just write random stuff on there to make yourself look busy, like you actually do something, or do you actually do things with that?
Yeah, I usually do a little quarterly planning on there, but I think the last quarterly planning I did on there was 2 years ago, maybe something
Yeah, I was
like
gonna
that.
say.
And then
I
sometimes
thought
the
I saw like
kids are on there.
2018.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some 2017 sessions up there, but no, I bust it out every once in a while. It's actually way bigger than you guys can all see, but it's something that I like. I like a lot of room when I start brainstorming, so I put it up there, and then I have a couple calendars taped on there. I don't know. Like I'm not the most organized person. Like if I did not have Google Calendar, like I'd be screwed. There'd be no way that I'd show up to anything. I'd just continue to build random things in the backyard, mow lawns, flip lawnmowers. I'd just be lost.
You know what? At least you're honest. At least you're honest, man.
I know there's too many people feeding you too much bull around here. I'll give it to you straight. So let's get on with it. Our sponsor, we love our sponsors on the Against All Average podcast. When you need all things digital looking their best, call our friends at Fame Pro Services. Our friends will give you the above all average treatment with an awesome new website, custom graphics, social media management, and a full line of printing services. Fame, the trusted partner of the Against All Average podcast. I'm excited about this one.
Me too, dude. I'm stoked. And I did want to give you a little compliment. Your whole sponsor plug, it's getting better over time. Round of applause for that.
I have one person clapping. This is awful. Hopefully we have more than one person download this podcast, or else I'm gonna cry. I need more claps. I need people to boost my ego so I can learn how to fluctuate my voice.
There you go. Hey,
it looks like you're at the county fair right now, aren't you?
Ding da ling da ling ding ding.
Jake's got the Zoom background with the Ferris wheel. He wished he was going round and round.
I wish I was. Hey, tell us about our guest today. I'm stoked. I want to learn and see who we got coming on, dude.
I'm going to bring the fire with this introduction. Our guest is going to be laughing so hard at the end of this. I think it's super important for us to make sure that the listeners know how bad to the bone our freaking guests are. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that their introductions are up to par. So let's get the party started. In this week's episode, we have someone that is 100% against everything that is average. Our guest today is a native of the Pacific Northwest and holds a graduate degree in social work and has dedicated her career in life to hospice work, eldercare issues, and grief counseling. She is a writer and entrepreneur and has recently published Beautiful Thunder, a book that goes in depth about getting through grief in a very real, raw, and vulnerable way. If that wasn't enough, she is also the co-owner of a home innovations company with her husband, Max. And with 2 kids at home and so much more on her plate, her days are nuttier than a porta potty at a peanut festival. But if anyone can handle it, Jenny can. What's up, Jenny?
What's up? That was quite the introduction, and I am honored and appreciative. Thank you. And that's quite accurate, actually. So you did well.
I know how crazy your days can be. So it's
Yep.
important that our listeners hear that from you, and we'll be trying to get some of that advice of just rolling through the craziness from you and different tactics that you use to be in, I don't know, 10 different places at once and managing. I don't, I do a lot of random things, but you put my crazy days to shame. So
Oh,
we're
well,
excited to
thank you.
have you. And I think the listeners will really love some of the different things that we talk about. So without babbling on too much, I'll let you babble a bit and talk a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what did middle school look like, high school. Let the listeners get to know you a little bit.
All right. Well, let's see. Going back as far as I can. I grew up in Hillsboro, Oregon, and small town girl, backcountry roads. That was my life. My childhood was really, I don't know if you can say ideal, because no childhood is perfect, but I grew up in a pretty easy childhood, I would say. We had a lot of fun. I grew up, sorry, my microphone. I'm going to take one earbud out. And, played with my friends. Life was pretty simple. Got into middle school, same thing. I think everything was really pretty easy, with the exception of in my book. If you read Beautiful Thunder, you'll see a couple little blurbs about my father because he was pretty hardcore. And now I'm grateful for it, but growing up wasn't always easy. He had pretty high expectations of me. And so that was probably the biggest challenge, just learning to maneuver that. And then went to Blanco High School with you, Kyle. So you kind of know a little bit about my background
Right.
there. I mean, really, I think in my younger years, softball was probably one of the highlights of my life. And then, I started working when I was 13, babysitting 3 little kids at that time, and then kind of stepped in some different directions, always had a job, graduated high school, and then went off to college at Oregon State University. And I studied psychology and Spanish, and from there kind of came back home and stepped into juvenile justice for a while with a psychology background. Then somewhere during my time in college is actually where my book Beautiful Thunder, I guess you could say, started, because at that point I lost the first love of my life, Tyler, who died in a car accident while I was at OSU. And I think that kind of pushed me towards psychology quite a bit, and just learning how to deal with grief. And so once I came back home, I started working in juvenile justice, and then figured out I actually wanted to dive deeper into that and really get to know my own struggle by helping other people with theirs. And so from there, I decided to go back to grad school and study social work, and then ended up stepping into the field of hospice, which I fell in love with, and worked in hospice for about 5 years. Then became a mom, and before that, a wife to my husband. We opened our business. We've been grinding quite a bit since we opened that up. And yeah, somewhere in there, I stayed home for a while and really delved into the book, which is, where my heart is at. I love writing. And then eventually I went back into social work, which I'm doing now full time, services coordination for older adults, and still doing some writing. So that's where I am now.
Awesome. Thanks for giving the listeners just kind of that little snippet, and we'll dive deeper into different areas as we get going. One of the things that kind of is getting my mind turning is you don't just write a book. Like it seems like you've been writing on and off and blogging, and you're on Instagram, and you've done a lot of different things. Talk about the start of this. Like, I feel like the book, it's not the end, but it's something that you've worked towards for many years. You've been
Mhm.
writing some similar stuff and helping different folks get through grief. And then a lot of the same themes are coming through in the book. Talk about your first day when you were like, I really want to start writing about this. I really want to start helping people. And what did that kind of look like with the chaos of being at the time being a stay-at-home mom? And we say stay-at-home mom like she's running the background of the business, she's doing books, she's answering phones, she's grabbing supplies. How are you finding time for all this? And what does it look like when you're starting all this writing?
Yeah, well, so, the writing, the thought of the writing came a long time ago. It was really early on in my grief. And I actually remember telling Tyler's parents at the time, I'm going to write a book about this. It's going to happen. It was just on my heart. And it was something that was never an option not to do it. I didn't know how it would play out. I certainly didn't know how much work it would be. But I just knew that it was something that in my life I needed to do and I wanted to do to help other people heal. And so the start of the writing started in 2008. And it followed, I'd had a couple heartbreaks, I guess you could say, in my life, following the big heartbreak of Tyler's death. And that kind of spiraled me into journaling and blogging. And the more I did that, the more people responded to my blog posts and told me how much they were helping them in their own journey with grief, whatever that might be, whether it was death, or a certain struggle that they were trying to overcome. And that really fed my fire to keep going with it, because I thought, it looks like this is making a difference, which has always been my goal for people, is to inspire everyone just to continue to dig as deep as you can, because there's so much beauty underneath all of like the hurt and obstacles that we face in this life. And I think that's really the stuff you have to get to be successful. And I know you guys are really focused on business, and that for me has been what drove me to keep writing. And so I blogged for a while, and then I gave it up for a few years. And in Beautiful Thunder, I talked a little bit about how my family was kind of questioning me at the time, saying, that they, in gentle words, I think they were concerned that I was holding on to my grief, which is not at all what writing the book was about. For me, it actually had a lot to do with letting it go and saying, here, world, now this is yours, to do with it what you will. And I've worked so hard on healing, and I'm ready now to give it to you, so you can do the same.
And I want to just stop you right there. And I've read Beautiful Thunder, and it's a great read for any of you that have experienced grief, or your friends are going through grief, or your family's going through grief. It helps to understand. Talk a little bit about the concept of you have to go through it your way. And it really doesn't matter from the outside. People may look at the way that you're processing grief and they think that you're doing it the wrong way. And that was something that hit home for me, is that everybody's path was a little bit different through grief, and how they act and how they react and what they do when they're experiencing grief. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was a big thing for me that I learned early on, was just not to compare myself to anybody else, because there's just no way to compare yourself in grief, because everybody's loss is completely different. The relationship that you've lost is different. The struggles that you hold, your coping mechanisms, all of it is just so unique to you as an individual that it does no good, for anyone to look at somebody else's journey and say, oh, they're doing it better than me, or they're right, or, and I think the biggest question that we struggle with as human beings when we walk that path is, am I doing this right? Am I doing it good enough? And that's a question that I think can haunt you early on. Like, there's a right way to grieve and to overcome tragedy. And I think once you learn to let go of that, that's where you can discover who you are, what you need, and then also pull tools and methods from other people, which is why I wrote the book, is that I wanted people to know how I walked that path. But my hope was also to explain that even though I chose this method, there's a million others out there that you might find work for you.
And you talk about methods, and what have you done in the last 10 years? I'm sure you've tried a lot of different ways in order to process your grief and continue to lead an exceptional life. What are some things that work for you currently when you're experiencing symptoms still from grief associated with the passing of Tyler, or anything else? Like, what is important to you each and every day so that you stay grounded?
Well, I think there's, in looking at all of that, there's just these little day to day habits, I guess you would call them, that you can get into to help you cope. And then there's bigger things that you can do when you're grieving and you really need to reach out for extra resources. The bigger things throughout my journey that I learned were a huge help was seeking out therapists, which a lot of people don't want to do because you think, oh, I'm crazy if I go talk to somebody, or what's that person going to do for me? And so I think that was a huge eye opening experience, talking to somebody else, even a friend, so that they can really help you step outside of your own mind. And I will say, in general, and especially now because I am a social worker, I believe in this tenfold. Whether it's business, whether it's grieving, I think you have to talk to other people, bounce ideas off of them, show your true self, what your struggles are. And that's where we learn from each other. Every time that I'm real and raw, like I'll walk away from this today with you guys and I'll go, oh my gosh, I just learned something new about myself because I shared my heart and we're having this real conversation. So I think for me, I learned through good friends, good counselors. I joined a grief group, which was an incredible experience. I sat down, and I write about that in the book as well, but I sat down with these other people that were going through just these horrific tragedies that I could not even imagine. And to sit in this raw space with people and share these journeys together, you just connect with them in a way that I can say I never connected with anybody before. So I think reaching out for help and really building a community for yourself is huge. And then beyond that, my writing helped me, just journaling, and then day-to-day habits. I wake up still every day, and I just told my husband today, I want you to start doing this as a reminder. Wake up and read something inspirational. Sorry, I keep pushing my earbuds and they never fit me quite right. But wake up every day, read something inspirational, listen to a podcast. I've gotten really into Audible books right now because my laundry was piling up, and I decided, you know what? Why not listen to something and learn and be inspired while I'm doing these mundane tasks of life? So I think keeping yourself in a place of growth constantly, which Kyle, I know you've mentioned even in your previous podcast, like for you, it's a big thing just to keep movement going. And
Right.
that is so important in life. It's like you're constantly testing and growing those muscles that we need to grow, and like using new ones. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just push yourself, always to seek something new, grow in a new way, and just try out something different. If it's not working, we all get in funk sometimes.
Yeah, I'd like to stay on that topic, and I'll have Jake chime in a second here after I go. But when I'm on, like when I'm in this state that I can do anything, I have great confidence, I feel like I'm communicating well, I feel like I'm doing a good job as a parent, as a husband. It's when I'm in those stages of getting up quickly, taking a shower right away, fixing a good breakfast and not a bad breakfast as far as nutrition goes. And then additionally, listening or reading inspiring messages or real messages of growth. And I do it while I walk. I listen to podcasts while I walk. And that's one of the reasons I started up the show, is because I heard all of the different guests offering so much of themselves basically for free to all the listeners, and it really has helped me through various struggles through business and the chaos of COVID-19, not being able to run basically both of my businesses at the moment. And so I'm talking into the microphone more than I am actually running two businesses that I'm kind of just waiting out as phase 1 and 2 um, get done. So that's what it looks like for me when I'm being productive. I'm doing those types of things. I'm on top of things. The room is not messy. My office is not messy. Those things are super helpful for me mentally to continue to be in a growth mindset. So I wanted to see what Jake had to say as well. He usually has the younger perspective, but always has a good perspective. And he's one of those people that he puts in his 14 hours a day. So Jake, when you're in your state of crushing it, so to speak, like what does it look like?
I mean, I feel like it's always something different. I think we all have different stages of quote crushing it, right? We can be crushing it in work, we can be crushing it with, just our personal time. And sometimes we're not crushing it on all levels. When I always feel like I'm crushing it is when I'm the most stressed. I'm like 13 emails deep, but things are flowing. I wake up at a certain time, and this is something for the younger generation. I have the most productive days when I wake up and I either get a laugh or a smile in within like the first 5 to 10 minutes. So I'll roll over, I'll open TikTok. You can laugh, it's fine. Open up TikTok and I'll just watch ridiculously stupid videos for a solid 5 minutes. And instantly I'm like, well, at least I'm not wasting my time making stupid videos. And that really pushes me to make a productive day. And I mean, very candidly, these past I'd say 4 months have been probably the hardest 4 months I've ever had to experience in my life. I spent 3 months recently in the ICU with my dad, fighting for his life. He was in the ICU for 3 months. We almost lost him. I got out of a 6-year relationship right in the middle of that. I run an event management business that completely went in the tank with COVID, and my world was really caving in. And the one thing that I found, I guess common in my crushing it days was I was waking up on time, I was smiling, and I was looking for those little things. It could be as little as going and getting a coffee, and that was crushing it for that day. And I think it's important that we don't get held up on absolutely crushing it on a big scale. Crushing it for you one day might be getting might be getting a cup of coffee, might be smiling that day. That might be crushing it for that one day.
Yeah, that's important. And Jenny, I wanted to go back to some of our listeners are sometimes probably in this extreme rut, and we all get there. We start not finding the fun in your business or your life or going to work. It's later and later. The alarm clock goes off and you're hitting snooze 15 times. Like, what are some first steps to get out of just a general funk?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think it can look a little different for everyone. And Jake, I want to thank you for sharing all of that personal life story with us, because you've had a really tough time. And I think you're speaking to a lot of people right now. I feel like this is one of those years in 2020 that is, we're going to remember forever. And I think for a lot of people, and myself included, I mean, I think a little low myself when this first started, just trying, and for me, that's always part of the process. I never look at that as a problem or a failure or anything. It's always, I know I'm coming back out of it because life is never going to beat me, but it's one of those things that we have to go through. And I feel like, right now, you can either look at 2020 as this terrible catastrophe, which it is, but then you can also look beyond that and say, you know what? This is probably one of the most important years of our lives. And what are we all doing with it right now? Are we sitting on the couch and are we feeling sorry for ourselves? Which, yes, we will do some of that. But then are we going to get back up and use that momentum to push us forward? So I just appreciate that you shared that, Jake, because I think you've gone through a lot. So I hope your dad's doing okay now. But you were saying, Kyle, you wanted to talk a little bit about getting out of the funk when you're in it. And
Right.
I think the first thing is not being hard on ourselves about it and reminding ourselves that everybody goes through that. Because I think we beat ourselves up a lot when we fall into a funk, whether we call it depression or we just call it, we're having a bad week or whatever it is you say to yourself. I think the number one thing is to stop beating yourself up about it. If you ate the extra donut or you had the extra drink or whatever it is, the first thing is to let that go and to start mentally processing what you're going through and preparing for what your plan is. I think we all have to create a plan in our mind of first assessing what do we need? Like what has gotten me out of a funk in the past? Because by a certain age, we've all gone through stuff. And so we've all learned some sort of coping mechanisms to get through those things, some unhealthy, and others, if you're somewhat of a healthy functioning adult, you know, you've got a good job, you're raising a family, Kyle, then you've used some really good coping skills to get through some pretty tough times before. And so I think we all have to kind of fall back on that a little bit and assess what was it that got me through this before, and I'm going to pull those tools forward now. And then it's also just figuring out individually, how do you push yourself? Because for some people, pushing themselves may be, you know, these little baby steps, and other people may say, I need to make a change in my life in order to shift gears a little bit. You need a new job, or, you know, something a little bit bigger. And so on a smaller scale, I think you have to look at the daily habit and what are you doing each day. And like Jake said, this is huge. You may be excited because you got a shower in. I mean, for me, in my darkest hours in this life, getting a shower was a huge step, and it literally is one thing that I got done that day. And so I think just looking at those little things, and I mentioned before, you know, how do you stay inspired? That's a big one. Take a breath of fresh air because we all get stuck inside our homes, inside our minds. And so sometimes we need to step out. Kyle, I know you go on runs frequently. That right there, a change of scenery is huge for us as human beings. We get stuck in our days and our minutes, our hours, our families, our circumstances, and we can't see outside of that. And sometimes just stepping outside and saying, hey, I'm going to go for a run, or this weekend, we're going to go take a trip to the beach, and I'm going to put my feet on the sand, you know, and just using different types of experiences to pull you out of that. There's so much psychology that goes behind with what happens to us when we experience big traumas, let alone small things. And our nervous systems get stuck in these modes. And then we feel depressed and we have all these symptoms of sadness. And really what we need to do is kick that part of our bodily system into a different gear in order for there to be some sort of release that happens in our body and therefore then in our mind. So
And we see the same thing, I know, with my kids. If we just change the scenery, we can usually change some of the emotion. And so I think it's extremely important that we learn a little something from kids. They may be
absolutely.
tearing a house apart. And my
Yep.
kids are like this. They're taking pictures off of walls. They're throwing forks at each other. They're talking back, and then you
Mhm.
take them on a bike ride and everything changes. So I think it's important for us to understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's important for us to understand that, if we're in a state where we feel like this is where I want to be, this is an exceptional life for me, I think it's important that we take a second, take a deep breath, and maybe use the tactic of writing in a journal, like, it was an exceptional day because, and you can kind of
Mhm.
list those different things. And that usually helps me kind of get out of those funks. It's like, just like you were saying, like, what did I do when I was in, like, what did the morning look like? What did lunch look like? What did dinner look like? What was after dinner? And trying to get back on the wagon. Another topic I'd like to kind of bring back is, and the one that was so important, just getting a shower in was super important. And I think
Mhm.
for me specifically, I'm way too hard on myself when I take those 3, 4 hours off and I'm kind of just idle. I'm not really spending much time with the family. I'm not really working. I'm just kind of in this state, and I just beat myself up about it. So that's one thing that I need to continue to work on, is that each day may look a little bit different, and we shouldn't not be proud of ourselves because we're taking a little break, or something's not working out the way we wanted it to.
And kind of going off that, we're talking a lot about what do the good days look like. And Jenny, I'm sure for you to get to the spot where you're at today, you had to experience the raw emotions of bad days. And I don't want our listeners to think that, oh, every day is going to be a good day. Like everybody needs to have a good day every day. Talk about how important it is to really feel those bad days, and that we have to have those bad days and really recognize them as bad days before we can have good days, and kind of the power of having bad days. And it's okay to have a bad day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that was one of the fears of as I was writing my book, because in my life I've always tended to err on the side of positivity. Yet I struggled for years in this dark space of just, despair. And so I've been there and I know how real it can be. And I think we tend to put on a good air in life for other people. Like we want people to think we're doing good. We strive for perfection. We don't want to share these, real raw emotions with other people because it's a scary thing to do. And at the same time, we worry other people can't handle them. But if we all would do a little bit more, I think we would see how tough we are as human beings. But yeah, I think you're right. It's so important to know that everybody goes through dark days, and like I said before, for me, it's part of the process. I think because it was early on in my life, I was 19 years old when Tyler died, and it was such a big trauma for me to experience just because it jolted me into this major existential crisis of like, oh my gosh, there's life and death, because I didn't really think there was death before. When you're young, you think everybody's invisible. But I think that in a way now that I've been able to heal through that, not to say I have perfect days every day because you still carry that with you, but I think it helped build my strength so that when things come along now, I know how to maneuver them. Like when I have a bad day, or even if, I break down in tears, and I hate to cry. I am not a crier. It's uncomfortable. No, nobody likes that feeling, but I will fight it off as much as I can. I'll get angry before I cry. But there's times when I just tell myself, you have to cry. Like you have to let the tears out, because if you don't, it bubbles in you like poison, and that's worse, than anything. So I think giving yourself permission to have dark days and then just being gentle with yourself as you go through those is so important, because we all have them.
And I think even kind of going even further into that on the whole bad days is, I feel like a lot of people get wrapped up in, oh, this is a bad day, like, I don't want to have these. But in every bad day, you're learning new things about yourself. You're building bigger tools. Like your artillery is constantly growing when you're having these bad days. And I love bad days because one, it makes you feel like those raw emotions, but two, you can look back and say, wow, like I got stronger over that. This feeling or whatever, this is going to carry on for me for the rest of my life. Like I'm bettering myself by having and acknowledging these bad things that are happening. And I want to make sure our listeners feel comfortable and confident in that even in these dark situations, you are still growing. It may not feel like you are growing substantially, but you're constantly learning, and it's okay to have. Kyle, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I've talked about failure more in this podcast than I have in my life, and it's just part of what I do. You probably talked to Jenny's husband, Max, as well, how many different times he's accidentally cut a piece of wood wrong or set a piece of tile wrong. I mean, it just happens all the time. And I think it's important to give yourself a little bit of grace and stop getting so mad at yourself and down at yourself for learning by failing. We have this notion that failing is not cool. I think it's freaking awesome. Like I don't like to fail, but usually it's the more reasonable route to learn something. And if you learned it by doing and you learn by failing, you have such a different connection to that skill than you would if you never tried and you just had an idea of how to build a house, how to wire a house, how to create a podcast. I mean, we're learning, we learn every single day what's good, what's bad, what's happening. And we're only able to do that by doing and either succeeding or failing. And there's no way in hell that you're just going to succeed every single time you do something. That's just irrational and puts way too much pressure on yourself. So I think that's important for entrepreneurs to know. It is okay. Like everything's okay. How fast or how slow you go, how much you fail, how much you succeed. If you make a bunch of money or a little money, you have a lot of impact or a little impact. Like it's okay wherever you're at. Yes, you want to get somewhere else, but wherever you're at, it's okay for now if your mind is in the right place to continue growing.
You can't get to the top of the mountain without summiting the middle of it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I know for me, I mean, my writing is the best when I'm in this raw place. I mean, I write a lot about grief, overcoming trauma, and it's kind of dark. And to be honest, I have to connect with my words as a writer. And so my writing is best when I'm connected with all of that emotion, the big emotions of the feelings of failure, the feelings of sadness. So I think sometimes the most beautiful and just like you guys are talking about, the strength comes from really being connected with that experience in our life.
Do you feel, I'm just curious, do you feel that you write your best and you're able to produce your best content when your emotions while you're writing are matching what you're writing about? Like if you're writing about sadness or grief or whatever it is, do you feel that your writing is better when you're actually truly feeling that way in person?
110%.
Whoa.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that's extremely important because that can transfer to anything, right? Even in the business world for entrepreneurs, you're going to be the best version of you when you feel that way. You know, the best salespeople are, gonna have the most success when they're jacked up, they're, feeling jacked up, they're excited, they're whatever. And to be able to get to that spot. And I think it's really cool that you recognize that, right? Because a lot of people just think, oh, I had a good day today. But take it a step further or a step backwards. Why? What's the why behind it? And I think that's really cool that that that's the reason, because you're emotionally connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on, Jake, with talking about, it's the connection that we have with this life that will ultimately bring us success. And we have to connect with every failure and, emotion of whatever that brings for you, frustration, anger. I mean, what I look back and I know that what has propelled me forward the most was when I was the most uncomfortable in this life. That's then when I decided to make an act of some sort to change the direction that I was going. So I think that goes for any of us. It's like when, you fail at business, once it gets uncomfortable enough, you've learned enough, then you go, okay, I'm going to use that to fuel, where I'm going next.
I just can't even, I can't, I can't imagine going through that many words. And your book is eye-opening in how you have dealt with grief and how you wanted to help. How much of your writing is for you and how much of your writing is for your need to help others?
Well, that's a good question, Kyle. That's a great question. Because I get so much out of writing. I mean, I've put this out there before, I know, on my Instagram and one of my posts. I don't even remember what it was about, but it was like, I just remember having this thought and the feeling of like writing is like breathing for me. And it is. I don't know, if you guys have something in your life that you're so passionate about that if you don't do it, there's like this major calling to you and nagging at you, like whether it's just being creative in some way, you just need to create something. I get that a lot with my writing, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I just have these rush of thoughts and feelings, and it's like I have to get this out. So in that respect, it's for me. But then there's always been this thing inside of me that wants to inspire other people to have hope, I think. And so there's so much of my writing that's written for that.
Wow. I sit here and like I'm listening to you and I'm trying to think of, next steps, and I'm just like completely wrapped up in all the knowledge that Jenny is absolutely dropping right now. I feel like
Oh,
I'm in a
thank
gold
you.
mine, and we just struck this big like million-pound nugget of gold, and it's just right in front of all of us, right, Kyle? I mean,
Aw.
Yeah,
this
well,
is just great.
everybody, you go on an entrepreneur's podcast and all they want to talk about is hustling. All they want to talk about is grinding, and they don't talk about
Sure.
the need to be mentally healthy in entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
And I think social media has done our generation specifically a disservice by continually showing images of success in only monetary ways. And you start
Absolutely.
looking into your driveway, it's like, oh, I don't have a Lambo, I don't have a
Yeah.
Ferrari. Am I an entrepreneur? I don't sell a course. Am I an entrepreneur? Like, I don't know. So I think it's extremely important that our listeners get this real and raw topics such as grief and moving through
Hmm.
them. And I think um, that's why this interview has been so exceptional. I want to get to something else, and this is hopefully something we can joke about, but I know you and your husband Max are pretty different. Talk about the way
That
the
was polite.
way
That was
the way in which
Yeah.
you approach things, the way he approaches things, and how do you guys make it work? Because in what you do, it's extremely dynamic. From one moment to the next, you could be going as fast as you can to Home Depot for certain type of screws because he wants that job done today. He has to start another one and he didn't plan for it. So talk a little bit about that and some of the struggles and some of the good times as far as figuring out how to work together when your partner is way different than you.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you might know him a little bit, Kyle.
Oh, just a little bit.
Yeah, that was a good description of him. Yeah, we are, I want to say polar opposites, really, in most ways, which I think when you put I think about this a lot actually, because day to day, of course, it creates tension. I mean, we're both trying to do our thing and then we have to stop and readjust and help each other. And so there's going to be tension there no matter what. And I think in any marriage, or partnership, whatever, even business partnership, there's going to be these
Right.
different things that you have to work through. Um, and I think, at least for me, I just try to remind myself that I bring to the table certain things, and have experience and knowledge in my own regard. But then I have to remember how much I've learned from Max because he's different from me. I think that's then probably one of the most powerful things in my life is marrying somebody that's my opposite. And
Right.
in certain ways, it could take you way the other direction because, you could get angry and there's a lot of frustration. But I think at least stepping back and being able really to look at it as, okay, so we are opposite. We do approach things differently. I mean, for us, systems is huge, because he tends to be 10 steps ahead at all times because he's thinking about a million different things, at any given moment, where I tend to walk a little slower and want to think through things a little more. So I think creating systems is a really big thing to help be successful. I mean, simple things like let's get a little calendar on the desk so we can write your appointments on it and you can actually visualize that. So it's getting out of his head onto paper. Or just a whiteboard as he walks out the door. We're going to make some notes for you so you know each day what you've got to do. And um,
And
so
and
I,
and Max, I want to stop you there for a second. And does Max use like a phone calendar system, or are you using sticky notes like, hey, the kids need to be dropped off at 3:30 or whatnot? Like, everybody thinks like systems like, oh, you're using this technology and that
Oh
technology.
gosh,
It
yeah.
seems like some of the best systems are old school, or you don't want to change them. So what does your calendar systems look like between you and Max when you're having a book launch on the same day as you have to work all day, at the same time you got to drop
Yeah.
the kids off, and Max is doing two different inspections on two different houses, and he's got to, I mean, what do
Yeah.
you do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good question, Kyle. We are still figuring that one out. I mean, I think for me, I've really had to figure out what works for him, because my system isn't necessarily Max's system.
Right.
So that's why for us, it is literally a paper calendar on the desk, just something that, I'll write things down, because as I think Max doesn't do any writing. He doesn't do any computer work. He struggles with dyslexia. And so that adds a whole nother layer into things. So I do a lot of the paperwork and writing. But we do not have a fancy system at all. And in fact, a fancy system would not work at all for us. And so I think just figuring out what your own system looks like is super important. But I literally painted a piece of plywood with, what's that called? Dry erase paint,
Yeah.
stuck it up on the wall for him. And that's where I write notes as he's going out the door. I say, you need to look at this every day, and I'll write important things. And then the other thing is just paper calendar on the desk. And today I called him about 10 times before this meeting that we're having to remind him. So that's what my day looked like.
And I
Oh,
kind of want to go a step further here in that, and just make sure our listeners kind of got that. Jenny really has to understand what Max's strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that goes so much further beyond the relationship into business, into coworkers, into friends, in that we can't have the expectation that other people are going to have the same strong suits as we do. And to
Mhm.
be I don't know if successful is the right word, but maybe to succeed in something, you have to understand what the other side is good at. It's like, if I don't know exactly what Max does in the construction world, but if I were to ask him to draw me a pretty painting, he probably couldn't do that. That's not his strong suit. And to really understand where the other side is coming from, what are they good at? What are they bad at? I would think go or works its way in volumes to getting things
Mhm.
done and being successful, and it's just kind of the whole 9 yards.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think if you learn how to lift other people up by their strengths, and that's something that with Max and his business, when we first started dating, had not, he didn't know what he was going to do. And then he decided, okay, this is where I'm going with this. And I think we both had to really work together to figure out, okay, how's this going to work? And by lifting up his strengths, and he has some really incredible strengths, which also are because of the things that he struggles with. I mean, they go hand in hand, but by lifting up those strengths, I've just seen him soar in ways that we didn't even expect. So it's pretty incredible once you start supporting somebody in that way, and vice versa. Same for me with the book. I mean, he did the same thing and fed into me so that I could follow the stream as well.
right.
Wow.
Um, So systems again are going to look differently depending on what your business is, who you're working with, etc.
Mhm.
Whatever works in the home or at business or in a business, excuse me, use that. You don't need some elaborate software if you've already figured out a way that really works. And this reminds me, my mom is about to retire. She's really excited, and she's been in insurance sales for so long. And there's been a couple different times where she goes into a partnership with a different company, and it just does not work. They do not listen well to each other. They have complete opposite systems, and it
Mhm.
just breaks everything down. So I think it's extremely important to understand that everybody works differently, and it can be so like just mentally taxing that somebody's just like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I don't even want to work with you if we only do Zoom calls." Or I don't want to work with you if you're always just going to do everything in Excel. And so I think it's important to match your systems with your company and also with the different people that are there.
Absolutely.
As we're wrapping this thing up, I want to let the listeners know where you can be found online, Jenny. And we're also we'll have a link to Amazon for your book in our show
Thank
notes for you. And you'll also have a social media package coming out for you to promote your show. But where can everybody find you?
So my website is www.jennyhealinghearts.com. And then on Instagram, my Instagram handle is Jenny Healing Hearts. So, and I want to thank
Awesome.
you guys for having me on here. I feel honored, and this has been such an awesome conversation with you guys. And I feel like I'm walking away with a lot myself. So I'm appreciative of that.
It's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. We've started this out, and crazy enough, this is episode 3. This is
13.
episode 13, and we only have 3 live right now. And so I'm excited for our listeners as we're figuring out how much content to put out and when. They're absolutely going to love this episode, as everybody's on a different path of healing and grief and ups and downs, and we're just in a crazy, crazy world right now. So this is going to be very beneficial. So in order to grow the podcast, we need your help. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and tell a friend about every episode you find value in, and share the episode on your favorite social media. If you liked the episode, please rate the episode and leave us a review. You can find us at Against All Average on all of your favorite social media platforms. Another big shout out to Jenny Murison. Thank you. And this episode's sponsor, Fame Pro Services. And with that, we thank you for listening to episode 13 of the Against All Average podcast. We'll see you next time.